Welcome to the Fantasy Boardroom. It is Tuesday, the new night for Fantasy Boardroom, and we are back in action. This meeting of the boardroom is called to session. Now, tonight's episode, special shout out to a member of the Get Right family, Rafi Bomb 69. This episode is inspired by him. An idea he threw out in one of our league chats. We'll zip on over there. I'm not going to read it word for word because, it's Rafi. We're not necessarily always family friendly here, but we still try to keep a certain phrasing away from here. So sorry, Rafi, but we'll give the cliff notes here. One thing Rafi Bomb 69 or Rafi 69 Bomb mentioned that I've always wanted to see do as far as a show goes is a lessons learned based on last year's draft. Just do top 4 or 5 rounds. Obviously, you can't take injuries into account, but focus on the bed shitters. So that's what we're going to do tonight. Rafi, I hope you're watching tonight. We're going to take a look back at 2023, the first 4 or 5 rounds, sniff out who those landmines were. Obviously, we have the benefit of hindsight, so we know exactly who blew it for us, and see if we can figure out why and apply those lessons here into 2024. And again, we're not going to factor in injuries. That can happen to any player, unfortunately. It does happen to many. The NFL has a 100% injury rate, just a violent sport. So let's just jump right in. And we're also, as we do this, I am actually able to just throw it up so that way once it starts, we can go. Because we might be able to throw some additional takes in as the Tuesday edition of the final week mock tournament of champions gets underway. So we have tonight, tomorrow, Thursday, and then the final semifinal coming up on Friday. So really excited to see how these boys do here. Many of these guys have been in recent drafts or in many of the drafts over the weeks, and we've got some really good drafters here. Some guys who've gotten some high grades from our team over the course of the tournament. Jake the Snake has done well. Uno Gas, Raven Joe, AB is King, Breaking Ball, Blower Up, Nader, Neanderthal. This is almost worthy of a final. Spitta, FaZe, DCAS, Atrev7 is the only name I'm not familiar with. I mean, we've got an all-star lineup here to go. And it started Jalen Hurts #1. This week is super flex. So this is a little different than what we're going to be talking about in the first 4 or 5 rounds in our lessons learned. We're focusing really on one QB there. That's what the ADP of these first 5 rounds will represent. And Lamar at 2. I appreciate that. Uno Gas, I appreciate that very much. Everybody knows me how much of a fan I am of Lamar. Although I would never take him over Allen. So, doesn't matter. So let's dive into what happened last year and what lessons we can learn for this year. So in the first round, the most obvious one, Austin Eckler. ESPN ADP of 3 overall, RB1, Sleeper ADP of 4 overall at RB2, and the exact same thing in Yahoo. His actual finish, RB26. This is also full PPR. For ESPN and Sleeper. For Yahoo, it's half PPR since that is the standard over there if you play in Yahoo leagues. One of the worst picks of the year, and while we did mention that injury does not count, injury did play a role here. He, for himself directly, relatively minor. Justin Herbert also got hurt and kept the team flailing. In the final half of the season, though, we really saw a big drop-off from Eckler. I mean, if you watch him, he looked slow. He looked kind of washed, which is a bummer because, here at Get Right, we are big Austin Eckler fans, but there's really no glossing over how he looked last year and how he performed last year. So even though the team was really not good, Justin Herbert got hurt, we just can't absolve Eckler based on what we saw in the final half of the year. And I think the lesson to be learned here is to avoid taking an age cliff RB or with an extremely high pick. I mean, we're talking top 4 picks here. Avoid taking an age cliff RB on a mediocre team with a head coach who is on the hot seat while you're here. And despite the previous excellent years before, I mean, there's plenty of reason to be optimistic about Austin freaking Eckler, especially in PPR. Those were major red flags, and they were missed by most, as reflected by the ADP, and including myself. I don't think I had him at RB2. I'd knocked him down to, I think, RB5 last year, but still had him as a first rounder, so I can't pretend like I was correctly identifying those flags. And the closest first round comparison that we can find this year is Saquon Barkley. Not a direct comparison, but he is nearing the age cliff, and he does have a coach who may be on the hot seat. If you recall, at the end of the 2023 season after the postseason, it was not a certainty that Nick Sirianni was going to be returning. So there's a lot of pressure on that staff and on that team. And they're unlikely to be a mediocre team. So we can't really throw that in the mix of his profile here, but there are signs. Now, I'm not fading Barkley. I'm very high on him because I am optimistic in his role in a much better offense than he's ever had, with a much better line, infinitely better line than he's ever had. So I'm still in on Barkley. However, Alvin Kamara, while not a first-round pick, still going in these top 5 rounds, fits his profile to an absolute T. Mediocre team, head coach on the hot seat, age cliff. All those things. His cost, though, 4th round, late 4th round in most cases, early 5th round in some platforms. So it's still risk, but nowhere near the risk. It probably does make you want to hesitate on Kamara at that stage, though, even in the 4th, 5th round. I mean, those first 5 picks are foundational for your team. Number 2 in the first round, Stephon Diggs. Now, technically on ESPN, he wasn't quite a first rounder. He had an ADP of 13, wide receiver 6 overall, sleeper ADP of 10, wide receiver 5, and Yahoo ADP of 11, wide receiver 5, actual finish wide receiver 9. Now, this is not very far off from his positional ADP. So normally I'm looking for something a bit more extreme. In the first round last year, not factoring injury, this was the next best one. And really, even though he was wide receiver 9 overall, context matters. Tremendous first half. That's what buoyed his season-long finish. But really seemed to check out for the most part after the midway point of the season. He only had 1 game over 10 points in weeks 10 through 17. So from week 10 through the end of your season, 1 double-digit performance. Just brutal. So he may have helped pad your early record, help get you into the playoffs, but he absolutely crushed you once you got there. In one dynasty league, I made a trade for him at our trade deadline in an attempt to shore up my wide receiver core for the playoffs, and that failed spectacularly. So now, admittedly, this is kind of a hard one to take a lesson from, because how do you predict that a guy's just seemingly going to check out of a season, so to speak? But there was one warning sign from last year, and that was that Diggs similarly disappeared in the 2022 fantasy playoffs. Just very underwhelming performance. Absolutely did not help anybody win their leagues in the playoffs. Let's check in on this draft here before we move on to the second round. Oh, and actually, no, I take that back. Now, there's not a real close comparison with him either, but the closest that you can come up with near this similar draft capital would be A.J. Brown. And he averaged less than 12 points per game in the fantasy playoffs, in the 2023 fantasy playoffs. So not what you're really looking for from your first round pick, as great as he was during the course of the year. A.J. Brown, though, AJB, it's my guy. Another guy you guys know I'm huge on, and I would never fade him. So there's not really an obvious fade in the first round this year, in my opinion, based on what we saw from Eckler and Diggs. So yeah, this draft. Curious. You know, a lot of times in these drafts, I feel like we see more teams try to get away with, or, push back drafting that second quarterback, but not the case tonight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 3 rounds already have 2 quarterbacks. Very interesting. Very interesting. And even more interesting is at the beginning of the draft, QB and then RB. That's quite interesting. Wrong chat, Dylan. All good, brother. Yeah, very interesting. Usually see wide receivers go much heavier. Or in these mocks, it's very rare to see a team fail to grab a receiver through the first 3 rounds. So interesting builds here. Interesting builds. This will be fun to grade later. All right, let's move on. In the second round last year, Josh Jacobs. ESPN ADP of 19, RB8 overall, sleeper ADP of 15, RB6, Yahoo ADP of 17, and RB8 in his actual finish, RB28. He had a few respectable games in there, and he did have an injury in there in the final 4 games that kind of deflated his season-long finish. But he was never really anywhere close to paying off at his ADP. Top 19, averaged out basically ADP of 17 across those 3 platforms. And really, this is an easy lesson to learn. Do not tie an early pick to a volume dependent running back who is in a bad offense with a bad QB who is coming off of a career year that has definitely inflated his price. Now, bad part is this is also very difficult to learn a lesson from because there really is nobody in these top rounds that quite fits that bill. It seems that maybe we have learned our lesson from last year naturally. People still saying that's a bold strategy, Cotton, in the year of our Lord 2024. Beautiful thing. Timeless quote. Timeless quote. It will never die. This might be a short show because we're flying through these, and I may not stay through the end of the draft. But just wanted to get this episode out there. Third round now. This is also one that, well, I did see coming even at the time. Najee Harris, ESPN ADP of 30, RB 11. Sleeper ADP of 27, RB 10. Yahoo ADP 25, RB 10. And actual finish, running back 23. This is always a terrible spot to draft Najee Harris in the first 3 rounds. Is outrageous, but there's some very similar lessons here that we're able to learn as we were from Jacobs. Don't tie an early pick to a volume-dependent running back, especially one like Najee, who is a rather inefficient one and in a bad offense with a bad quarterback. Especially not one who has a capable running back in the teammate in his running back room, and one that is particularly adept at pass catching, is the preference for the passing work, the most valuable work in fantasy. All the signs were there. It was obvious to never take Najee this early. This never had a chance. Never had a chance to pay off at ADP. It was baffling. Can't believe it happened. Again, no real direct comparison, but the most closely drawn one we can come up with here is Rachaad White. He is the one that most closely fits this. Doesn't necessarily have a bad offense or quarterback, but say probably a mid quarterback, and the offense has a chance. It's certainly not going to be bad, but it probably won't be great. Rachaad, though, he's woefully inefficient. He is very volume dependent, and he now also himself has capable competition in the backfield in Bucky Irving. So that's a guy I would definitely stray away from at current ADP. Never let the 111 cook. What do we got there? Richardson, A.J. Brown, Sam Laporta, Isaiah Pacheco. DCAS is doing work so far. I'm a fan of that build as it is. It's a good one. It's a good one. And in the 4th round last year, this was probably the most obvious one of all. Absolutely insane that this guy was going in the 4th round, and on ESPN even in the 3rd round. I mean, we screamed this from the rooftops at the time last year, so this will be a very, very simple lesson to learn. Dameon Pierce, ESPN ADP 34, running back 15. Sleeper ADP of 47, he was running back 18. Yahoo ADP of 41 and running back 17. His actual finish, running back 55. Just absolutely brutal for anybody who, for some reason, drafted him at that point in their draft. This was another incredibly obvious one, but this one provides the most simple lesson of all. Don't draft bad players. Number one piece of advice I can give to you ever. When you draft players, draft good football players. Good players. You do that, you'll generally be okay. Pierce was not good in 2022, and Houston brought in Devin Singletary, who was much better. And Devin Singletary isn't even that great. Good, capable NFL running back, but certainly no one's confusing for a top talent. When a player performs mid at absolute best, in the case of Dameon Pierce for certain games, and then they bring in a good player at the position, just fade him completely. Well, actually, we'll get to your question here in a second, Rocky. So before we do so, final thought here. Again, the most close player that fits this profile is Rachaad White. He is very inefficient, he's not especially good. And competition has been added. Now, I'm not going to say Bucky Irving is or isn't as good as Devin Singletary yet. I don't know. But he appears to be capable. And again, White is just right to be overtaken or at least have his work very cut into. So avoid White early in your drafts. Rashad White. Rafi Baum, thoughts on volume dependent players versus TD dependent players like Devontae Adams. He may have 150 targets, but very little upside for TDs. Devontae is a guy I still like quite a bit. I think I have him at wide receiver 8 or 9. It's with wide receivers, I think it's a little bit different than running backs when it comes to volume dependence, especially when it comes to PPR. I mean, in the case of Adams, those 150 targets are still going to equal a lot of points. And while he doesn't have the upside of, 15 to 20 touchdown season like he would have in Green Bay, I think still very much has the upside for 10 to 12. I mean, I would say 12 to 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns. I think you could still very much see on the table for Devontae with over 100 catches mixed into that. So, I mean, you're 260, 270 point player, somewhere in that range in all likelihood. So where would that even put us, as far as projections? If I can even find him here. Yeah, so projected at 234 on Sleeper for the upcoming year. So whatever, we'll just say in the 250 point-ish range, which would have him, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, it's not even sorting correctly. It's hard to say, but that's still going to be a very valuable player. I mean, 250. Yeah, I mean, it squarely in the wide receiver 1 conversation. So, in his case, only game in town, too. So, it's not just volume dependence, but that the team truly has to be dependent on that volume. So it's different when, yeah, I guess that's the best way to say it. When the player is dependent on the volume for the stats, it also depends on how much the team is dependent on their production for results. So with Adams, I'm still comfortable with him versus somebody, say some wide receiver 2 that made, say Devontae Smith, much better offense, going to score a hell of a lot more touchdowns. But how many of those is he really going to get in combination with the additional fantasy producing statistics? So I guaranteed production with what I don't know. Adams is a hard example because I don't think his ceiling is super low. He doesn't have a chance at wide receiver 1 overall, probably not even top 5, but right there in that 8, 9, 10 window, he's going to be right there, I think. Gardner's not a good quarterback, but he's a capable quarterback. He can get it done for him. So in general, too, I'd say shoot for upside. I mean, you definitely want to tie yourself to good players on the best offense as possible. But for truly, truly elite players who also are really just the only real weapon, now, I think Bowers is good. Myers has shown himself to be a proven NFL receiver as well. But the gap between Adams and those guys is so massive. So, and I didn't really find all right, back to our lessons learned, though. I didn't really find anybody in the 5th round that was so egregious, at least on average last year. So that's the general takeaway here or the general spiel that I have for lessons learned. So the overall takeaway, though, as I came away from this, is that the wide receiver picks in general, injury is notwithstanding, seem to be a whole lot safer. While the finishing order versus ADP order was obviously very different. They didn't get drafted in perfect ranking or anything. Not that many early wide receivers were significantly off. And similar with QB, and going with the QB early is more of a strategic preference than I think good or bad. So I didn't really factor them into much of this. But the running back picks far riskier. Far riskier. Not necessarily due to the position, but for all the reasons we mentioned. It's just much easier to miss some red flags, or we chose to ignore them in the effort of trying to secure a top back, which is tough. But that's why we have the running back dead zone. You get a lot of disappointing results in those cases in that 4th, 5th, 6th round tier, sometimes starting in the 3rd. So this year, it could be very similar. There's a clear group of top backs, so be wary. I mean, I still have some Kamara, but be wary of somebody like Kamara. Be extremely wary of a Rashad White. Kyron Williams is a guy I wanted to work in here too, honestly, because I'm very terrified of him in the 2nd round. But he didn't really fit the profile of some of the biggest bombs that we had last year. He is on a good offense with a good quarterback, good coach who's at no risk of going anywhere. He wasn't especially he wasn't that volume. I mean, he had a ton of volume, and that's what really pushed him to the top. But he was efficient enough that I'm not going to say that he's truly just a volume dependent guy. But I am worried about the competition he has. I think Corum's just as good of an athlete, if not better. I don't know if he's as good of a running back yet, but I think he's really going to push him. I think he's going to get his chances to do so. I really think he is. So I do think that cut in volume is really going to hurt Kyron. I don't think he's going to be a massive, horrible disappointment, but I think the 2nd round pick is going to be way too rich. I don't think he really has a chance to pay off there. So I wanted to include him here as a potential landmine, but was not able to do so based on what we found. Sometimes the research leads you to a different conclusion than you think you were going to have. So that's really all I got. So I don't think I'm going to finish this draft out for truly no reason. Please, if you do want to follow along with this draft or continue to do so, go over to Sleeper, go to the Get Right channel, go to the Get Right Mock Tourney of Champions thread, and it will be the 3rd to last link posted. It should have the title above it, showing the date here, Tuesday, 8/20. And just follow along, because we only have a few of these left. It's been a blast running this tournament with the guys. Dylan. What do I think of your team? Are you DCast, Dylan? I didn't think you were. You said 111, right? But DCast isn't you, I'm pretty sure. Am I tripping, Dylan? Correct me. Oh, all right. Well, if that is, yeah, well, all right. So Richardson, AJ Brown, Sam Laporta, Pacheco, Kamara, Cooper, Watson, Connor. I do like this team. I probably would have passed on Laporta and taken a second receiver there instead. You can get a really good comparable tight end to Laporta, a couple rounds later. I mean, McBride went 2 rounds later. Andrews almost 3 rounds later. So that might be the only complaint, but we'll see how you can fill out this wide receiver room. But the running back room is very solid, very high end with Richardson, AJ Brown, Laporta. So, I mean, you have a chance. You've at least set yourself up for the chance to have the QB 1, wide receiver 1, and tight end 1. I don't think any of them will quite get there, but they definitely all could be. That's in the range of outcomes. So you did swing for the fences, as you said here, but I think that's good though. I mean, we're playing for first place, right? Not second place, not fifth place. Watson could prove to be a really good value. I mean, it's so hard to say. It's because we haven't seen it in so long, but we still have seen it. We know the guy has the talent somewhere. If he can ever really regain his form is the other question. So I'm okay with him in that spot as well, especially to have another guy who at least is a little bit of a running threat as well in the backup QB position or the QB2 position. Connor, Kamara, Pacheco, a little bit of risk, but all should be really solid. So yeah, just try and crush the rest of this wide receiver room if you can. See if you can find some value left on the board in that area, and you can find yourself with a really, really nice team. And QB3 will probably matter too, just because Watson is your QB2, but I wouldn't reach too far for it. Very interesting, but good team, good team. I would not be upset with leaving a draft with that. Breaking is a good squad. Love on Cup over Diggs, though. Wait, is that what happened? Did he take? Ooh. That is a good squad, but that is a glaring mistake, in my opinion. I agree with you 100%, Rafi. Coop over Diggs 100 times. Cup over Diggs out of 100 times out of 100 this year for sure. Yeah, you put Cup right there. This might be one of my favorite teams so far. Oh, man. I mean, maybe you have your reasons breaking ball, but woof. Heisenberg, Cooper Cup, wide receiver 1 season incoming, or I think wide receiver 3. Yeah, I don't know. He's gonna be great. Gonna be great. Well, again, though, that's all I have. So please, you guys go over. Yeah, if you want to keep following this draft, go over to Sleeper, Get Right channel, third link from the bottom. It will take you there. Continue to follow along throughout the rest of the week. If you're still trying to get in, just keep an eye out. Sometimes people drop out even if they're full. So keep checking back in, see if you can get yourself a spot. Otherwise, looking forward to coming back with you next week, doing this again. Now, next week, I haven't 100% decided what the topic's going to be, but probably, as we're just so close and there are going to be some final drafts, work, home leagues, whatever, the less degenerate leagues that don't, that draft closer to the season to account for training camp and preseason injuries. What I plan to do, I think I should be able to carve out enough time to do it. I go through probably 10 rounds of each of the 3 primary popular platforms in ESPN, Yahoo, and Sleeper. Find the best pick in each round by ADP and the worst pick. Share the thoughts of those so you can go into your final drafts fully prepared and knowing where to find the value and where not to get screwed. Equally important. First round is absolutely stacked this year, though. You should be able to start out with a stud player no matter what. That's the beauty of it. And just pray they stay healthy. Once again, thank you all. I appreciate your attention. I appreciate your time. The most valuable thing you have, the one thing you cannot buy, the one thing you cannot replace. So I can never thank you enough for spending the last half hour of your time with me. It's been a great night. Make sure you tune in tomorrow. We have the boys back yet again. We'll have Frank and Ant coming at you tomorrow night. And I will see you next Tuesday. Thank you all. This meeting of the Fantasy Boardroom is adjourned. Wanted to write fantasy is the play. Marking nothing but I tune every Friday. Strategies provided.